we move on, for those, we have maybe another half hour for the photography session. Now would be a good time to get a cup of coffee. I had ginataan earlier, a glass of water, and so in time for this next session. Moving on to the photography skills portion. For the next half hour, lifestyle photographer Isa Sarmiento, our other Isa this afternoon, all the way from Vancouver, will give you some tips on how to DIY, do it yourself, to come up with attractive, well-lit, Instagram and website-worthy photos. ArteFino welcomes Isa Sarmiento.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So if you guys survive this, I mean, it's a good idea that Cruz really spoke about brand values, because at the end of it, after diving deep into your brand values, your vision, your mission, how do you translate all of this or your branding philosophy into images that you can use for marketing? So when Cruz came to me with this session or this workshop, she mentioned that it will be targeted specifically to ArteFino clients. And so she gave me a list of who's part of ArteFino, and then I checked your social media. Some didn't, some had. I would say, like, I think most do need work, but then it's not as if you're starting from zero. I think what lacks is consistent branding across the board, because there are photos, and I actually got a few photos from a few of the clients, and I use it as example, which I found that were good examples. So let's start it off. Next slide. So what is my philosophy in taking photos? Personally, my philosophy is minimal editing. So anything you can fix before you photograph it, do it. So here are examples that are photos that I shot for an interior designer. So these are obviously the after. And in the next few slides, you'll see photos of the before and after. So before, you'll see what the image looks like, what it looks like out of camera, and after, I just minimal editing, increase the brightness, kind of change the temperature. Next slide. Same with here, you can see the before and after. Just really like, literally, like I had a tripod, I put my camera, and we moved everything in place. Third. Next slide. Yeah. And then same with this one. So for this session, I spoke to Cruz, and this is specific to using just your smartphone or your mobile photography. So on the next slide, I'll list down, I'm sure you guys have been using this, but just kind of to recap, first of all, you need a smartphone or a phone that has a camera in it. It's just as it is. The newer the mobile, the better it is, just because the lens that is included in the smartphone is just better, and it will just make it easier for you. But don't worry, if your smartphone is just an older version, you can still take great photos, in my opinion, because photography is all about using light. So as long as you have great light, you'll be able to take a photo with the oldest version of the smartphone. Second, tripod. This is not necessary, but if you wanted to invest in a tripod, I suggest getting the Gorilla tripod. Next, you'll need a stool or basically any chair that you can stand on. This will be helpful when you're doing flat lays. Next, it's a table to put your items. So all of these, I'm pretty sure, minus the tripod, I'm pretty sure all of these items you have at home. Next slide. So after gathering all your materials, what light source would you use? Personally, I like using window light source. So a little bit of background about me. With all of my work, regardless of whether I do weddings or portraits or branding sessions, my style is I use a lot of natural lighting. I would say 90% of my work, I use natural lighting. I use a pop of flash if needed, if they're just lacking in a bit of light. But in essence, I use the sun as my light source, and I just diffuse it in other ways to bring out the emotion. So as I mentioned, so window. So once you set up your home studio in your house, my first tip is, if you have other sources of light like ceiling lights, tungsten lights, chandeliers, and it's near where you're doing your setup, turn them off, because this will cause or this will throw off the light casting on your product. And once you take a photo, it just won't be the same. So that would be my first suggestion. Next, so there are two types of light, I would say. And then if you're a beginner at this and you're really like Zara and Janice, they started from scratch. I mean, they've gone through this process, but if you're like them before, I would say start trying to focus on soft light first. So there's two kinds of light, soft light and hard light. So soft light basically means that you don't shoot the product where the light source or the sun is hitting the product directly. So if any case, wherever you live, what if you can't like move the sun, obviously, and like most of the day, the sun is hitting that certain spot where you want to set up. So there are ways wherein you can diffuse that hard light. One is by placing a white cloth by the window or any translucent material, or you can also move the table where the light doesn't directly hit the product. So if it becomes shadowy, like a few feet away from the window, feel free to just move that, and the light that's casting on it, that will serve as a soft light. Also, the reason why soft light also works, it's because it helps make your product details pop out more. But then, of course, like after using soft light and just focusing on it, once you have a better understanding, you can take your image making to the next level by using hard light. So in the next slide, I'll show you two ways you can start setting up your homemade studio. There are actually other types of lighting, but I just decided for this session to just pick like the top two or the top three things that you can focus on just as a starting point. And then once you get a better understanding and you get used to it more, then you can kind of level up and add more foundations. So first is side lighting. As mentioned, side lighting, wherein the light is coming from the side, either the left or the right. So here in the diagram on the left, you can see I placed a diagram that I got online. On the left, it's the window, the product, you can see the background, and then you can see where the camera is pointing. So you can either move your product like near to the window, further from the window. It really depends based on your branding values and based on your mood board. You also see here a reflector. So what is a reflector? A reflector is a type of diffuser that helps minimize shadows. So I guess if you guys have been doing shoots, you've seen it. It's that circular thing. It could be white, there could be gold, there could be silver. You don't really need to invest, especially if your products are small. You can actually do a do-it-yourself. So any white material would do. If you have cardboard, I'm sure you have boxes there, just wrap it around a white material, or even if you have bond paper, just wrap it around with bond paper, and that can serve as your reflector. And on the so I talked about side lighting. So the other type of lighting that you can use is flat lighting, which is basically the sun or the light is hitting the product up front. And in here, you'll see a diagram of how the setup looks like in real life on the right side. So you see the product and you see the background and you see that the light is coming from the side. So this is an example of a side light. And next slide. So as I mentioned before, once you've gotten the handle of using soft light, you can level up by playing around with hard light. So here, these are actually photos that I took from one of your ArteFino clients. And so I really like this because on the left, it clearly shows what soft light looks like. Soft light, basically minimal shadows. And on the right, you can see hard light is pretty much defined with harsh and distinct shadows, which also can give or produce more dynamic images. Next slide. And these are also photos that I got off the internet. On the left side is actually the hard light, and on the right is the soft light. Both look good to me, so it really depends on your, what your brand value is, which basically is what your brand philosophy is. But this is just kind of two distinct lighting scenarios wherein they both look good, but at the end it's up to your discretion which you want to choose. So next slide. So after having, the materials that you need, what will you start with? Well, first you need a clean background to make your product pop. So the most basic background is obviously white, but if you want to level up your images, you can choose a non-white background, which may be like a nude color or off-white, or you can make a whole new background by combining two different types of backgrounds or textures. Next slide. So here it's an example of obviously with this one, I'll talk about it more later on, but this was from the interior designer again. And because our focus here was to focus on the furniture. So she had like a dark background in her patio. So we used that as a background. And pretty much this was her setup in the patio. So it, like you can see it, we non-traditionally, we didn't use a white background. And on the next slide, here you'll see what I talked about, like creating a new background from by using 2 or 3 other types of textures. So here on the left, you can see the setup of the white bond paper, and then they also just added like another, like a pattern paper. And then when they took the photo, everything looks like just one consistent background. So this, I'm pretty sure, like this is doable and could be done at home. For those who have kids, I'm sure they have colored bond paper. You can go to National Bookstore, you know, buy paper that has texture, and you can play around with that. Next slide. So how to photograph products with just the product itself? Well, I'm pretty sure most of you know about this already, but I'll just reiterate it. So the basic e-commerce photo is, you know, shoot eye level, front, back, turn the product 45 degrees, and take detailed photos. You can simply do this by having the product against the background. So the next few slides will show like just different angles which you can use as a foundation for your product. So I actually shot this. This was like a custom chair by the same designer that I work with. You might think like, oh, this was done in studio, but actually I used window light to photograph this, and it was against a white background. I did have to take out the background, but I didn't need to use any studio light. But for your, you know, for your needs, just you don't have to choose a white background, choose a different kind of background that you can use. And then the different angles you can use in when you think of your concept for your next campaign. And then next, and then this is just samples of the detail shots that I took. And then next, I just got like a photo from the internet just to kind of like, it was just a good foundation for like a sample of shoes. Oh, next. Yeah, so here, front, back, side to side, top, bottom, and like a 45-degree angle. So next. So we've tackled like just shooting the product itself. So how do you make your images more dynamic? I actually saw a lot of this in Janice's photos or even in Zara's photos in our social media. So just integrate 1 or 3 other elements in the photo, and then it can change the whole feel of the images that you make. So to start off, like I think Janice already spoke about this, like what type of element should I use? Well, go back to your branding values, go back to your mood board. Like what Isa Cruz, I guess, mentioned to Janice, like if you're selling a natural product, then use elements that are natural too. In the end, choose products that are complementary to the actual product itself, as I mentioned. And you know, the goal of these other elements are supposed to highlight your main product. They're not supposed to be the highlight of the photo. So again, choose products that complement the main product itself. And then after, you know, choosing the elements that you want to include, you can also level up your photo taking by doing flat lays, which is basically taking a photo from a bird's eye point of view. And then next. So here are just a few examples. So the 2 photos on the upper left and the one on the right, I took that. So those were for essential oils. So on the upper left, you'll see the 2 elements that I use. Well, I guess 3, including the table. Well, I guess, sorry, 4, including the hand. But basically, she wanted to focus on the box and also what kind of essential oil this is. So we included the lamp. And on the right side, it's kind of similar. Like she wanted to focus on this because it was an item that she used a lot in her living room. On the lower left, where the jewelry, you notice like it has a clean background. The added element is a gold pineapple, which complements the jewelry, the gold in the jewelry. And then the images in the middle, I actually got it from one of the ArteFino clients. And I really like this because I think it was good use of adding 1 or 2 elements with having a clean background. So in the photo of the spray, you can see the colors that she used, like the plant that she used complemented the color of the bottle. And then the one in the bottom, the ingredients that she chose, obviously it's the ingredients of the product, but the way she placed it and the way the background that she chose complemented the main product itself. Next slide. And so now that you have all of this, like how do you take a photo? So composition and framing. So first of all, before you take a photo, think also about the layout of the image or how it's going to be used. So I know we're all talking about mobile photography, that it's going to be in the digital aspect or digital field. So for example, if you're doing Facebook ads, I would suggest take a lot of horizontal photos. But if you're just starting, obviously my suggestion would be take a horizontal and a vertical photo of every layout that you think of. And then, you know, the more you'll probably take 100 photos, which is fine. That's very normal. And then you can edit down and choose. And once you get the better hang of taking photos, then you have a better idea on whether you should do more horizontal or vertical, depending on your need. And then also another tip I would say is, obviously, since, you know, when you take a photo, you're probably going to want to use it for Instagram, which is the aspect ratio of that is square, or your website, which can be rectangular or vertical. I would say shoot your layout a little bit 10% wider, so that when you crop it in, depending on where you're going to use it, it'll be easier for you. But on this other hand, don't shoot it too wide that you would have to crop the image more than 50%. So there is an example later and I'll go back to that. So back to composition and framing. So aside from the basic e-commerce photo that I mentioned, here are some basic foundations in terms of composition. So there's more than this, but again, I chose maybe 3 that I feel like you could focus on right now, and then focus on that, do that really well. And then once you get the hang of it, you can add other foundations. And at the end of this, there's a few links of resources which I read, and there are more information, and all the tidbits that I got there, I just kind of edited it down because I didn't want to overwhelm you with too much information. So there are 3. So on the next slide, I'll discuss the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds is basically, if you have a photo, you know, divide it into 3. So where the intersection, where you can see the intersection, ideally you would want to place your product or model there, and it makes your photo just much more dynamic. So if you're using your mobile phone and it's, you know, you don't really take photos, a good guide would be turning on the grid in your smartphone. All the smartphones right now have that. So you can just go to settings. Even if you Google, turn on grid in your smartphone, it'll give you specific instructions. And then when you take a photo, the grid will show up. So that will make it easier for you. In the next slide, I'll be talking about Z movement. So Z movement is basically the natural way of how our eyes read things. So we usually naturally start from the upper left and we end on the lower right. I guess like when you also read books, it's just like you go from left to right, right? So ideally, if you can place the elements or your focus point within the line of sight, that would be good for you. So here on the right, you can see there's an example. The focus is the glasses here with the alcohol. And so, but when you look at the photo, you start from the top and then your eyes get drawn and it ends up at the bottom. And then the third one is depth of field. So depth of field, you can create this by many ways. One is by layering your objects from foreground to background. And when I mean foreground to background, it's foreground from your mobile phone. So here, the first, I guess all the images minus the shoe shot, everything is layered from foreground to background. So that creates some depth, and then that creates a little bit more of a dynamic touch to your image. And then the other one, like with the shoe, another way that you can create that depth of field is by placing the product nearest to the camera, or you can also place the product away from your background to create that separation from foreground to background. Next. So next is cropping. So after taking the photo, depending on the use, if you need it for a Facebook ad or if you need it for Instagram. So these are just kind of best practices. So if you're using a model, or there's a human body part in your in your image. Avoid cropping at the joints. So here you see like obviously a human photo. So where the green line is, that would be my suggestion on where to crop your photo. And on the next, you'll see examples. So this is the interior designer who's my client. So if you notice the area where I cropped her body, on the left, it's in between her joints. In the middle, it's like lower than her hip. It's not at her hip. And on the third, if you can see, it's her hand, and it's cropped in between her joints as well. And on the next slide, so background, make sure to take out any distracting elements. So on the left, this was out of camera. So these were all edited already. And then if you notice, there's those white like plates. So that's the thermostat of the background. So you can either edit it out or you can crop it in. But for me, like on the right image, it just looks cleaner because your eyes don't get drawn to those two rectangular white objects at the top. And then next. So this is a photo I saw as one of the ArteFino clients. I think there's a good starting point to this one. So the original image is on the left, but I think to make the person focus more on the product, I would crop it like how the second image looks like. If you notice in the original image, you can see a little bit of clutter or a little bit of distracting elements on the side. I'm assuming it's like probably other materials. So if you can either physically move that away or crop your photo a little bit closer, or actually not crop, but like go near to your image and take a photo of it. And then the third image is if you needed to make a detail shot and you have no choice, but you already took a photo of the product, I would suggest cropping it this way. But in essence, when I said a while ago about don't shoot it too wide because it also affects the pixels of the photo that you take, and when you upload it, it won't be as crisp. I would say if you were given the opportunity to take the detail shot again, I would physically go closer, shoot it a little bit wider so that you can get the same effect as the third photo. Next. So next I'll be talking about your mobile settings. So I think I mentioned this already. Turn on the grid lines in your camera if you're not used to taking photos. Yes, this will help give you like just like a basic foundation or a guideline for you. My next suggestion is choose one lens angle. It's better for you to physically move near to the object rather than using the zoom in or zoom out function of your camera, just because when you're zooming in, it actually like distorts the pixels and it makes it more grainy. I would say avoid using the wide angle lens. In other circumstances, I would say, yeah, go ahead, be as creative as you want. But have in mind, you're selling a product and you want the photos to match the actual product in real life. In terms of settings, I know like for the smartphone cameras, there's like the manual mode or the pro mode, or there's even the default photo settings. To be honest, for beginners, the default photo setting works. But again, if you want to level up your skills, you can level up by using the pro mode or manual mode. Next slide. So if you are thinking of leveling up your skill level and graduating from default photo to manual mode or pro mode, here are a few tips that I have. So obviously in using the pro mode, you have to balance 4 elements in order to have a photo that is completely exposed well. So first I'll talk about aperture. So aperture is also another way wherein you can create depth of field. So the higher the aperture or the lower the number, which is on the left, like f1.8, the greater the separation from the focus point or your product to the background. On the next, shutter speed. So if you don't have a tripod and you're just doing everything handheld, I would say don't go below 1/100 of a second. So that means don't shoot 1/30, just because if you do that, there will be more light on your object, but it will cause a blur, which right now I don't think that's like the purpose of why you're taking photos. So if you are using a hand, if you don't have a tripod, just stick to 1/100 and just fix the other elements in manual mode. So next slide, please. Next is the ISO. So the lower the ISO, the less grainy the photo will be. So I would avoid shooting ISO 3200, 2500. I would say ballpark, just if you can do 800 to 1000 only, then that would be great. Just because, as I mentioned, the higher the ISO, the grainier the photo will be. And then next, lastly, it's the white balance. To be honest, if you're starting, you can even just choose auto, since you can see the image already. This is also another reason why I said, like, if you're setting up your homemade studio by the window, to close other light sources, because it can also throw off the white balance. So basically, the white balance, the camera tries to compensate for the outside environment. So if your light, obviously, like if you're shooting outside and it's a cloudy day, and you have another light source, this might come out. But yeah, as I mentioned before, stick to auto, and then once you master that, then you can like choose daylight or shade or cloudy. But to be honest, auto works fine. Next. So after all of that, here are a few styling tips. First, for me, basic foundation is the background. So um, my I guess my opinion about this is either you go textured or you go smooth. Don't go in between. You don't want to have a background wherein when a person is looking at the photo, their eye goes to the background because they see like it looks a bit off. Again, the background is the foundation. It's supposed to complement your main product. Next. Here's the grid. This, if you search them, it's our little side hustle. So they sell masks here in Vancouver. So they're really good with just using layers and using 1 to 3 elements or even less and producing their photos. So again, you can layer products. If you have multiple products that you're selling, you can layer it on top of each other, or you can also layer the elements in terms of fixing them from foreground to background. Again, use complementary colors. If you can understand what complementary colors is, obviously you'd have your brand philosophy right now. So in your brand philosophy, if your colors are stuck to, like, I don't know, blue, white, and red, so just stick to those colors or those shades. And as mentioned, you can choose 1 to 3 elements to play around with, even if you just start with one. So if you can see, like on the lower right, you can see the 2 masks, and then literally she just added like a plant to just give it a little bit more of a dynamic feel. Next. So for the e-commerce shots, to make it more dynamic, try taking it obviously different angle, and also invest in nice looking hangers. So I did notice some of the photos, it had some of the clients of ArteFino, I noticed that the hangers were plastic. And so if you can invest in nice looking hangers, I feel like that also tells more of a story about your brand. So like, if obviously if your product is natural made, then invest in a natural or organic looking hanger. And my suggestion obviously for clothing is whatever needs to be ironed out, iron it out. Next. So using shadows, I would say, is a next level up in terms of creating images. And here you can see a setup. So on the left, it's how the person set it up. So I'm sure these materials you can find at your home. You have a glass of water. Everyone seems to be like growing plants nowadays. So if you want to cut a little bit and just use the shadow of that plant and then place your product in front of the background. And so you can see the shadow that the leaf created can be your background, and it just kind of makes your image a little bit more dynamic. So next is our best practices. I would, for me personally, avoid a cluttered background. So the simpler, the better. So even if it's just a white background or like a solid colored background, as much as possible, make it simple. Second is plan your session. Always go back to your branding and visual values. I would say if you're going to have a photo day, even if it's you're doing it on your own, set a goal of how many layouts you will need. So in an hour, if you're just starting and you want to just produce 3, well, then have that as your goal, as opposed to like, just shooting and you don't really know what you're shooting for. So So second, have a goal. If possible, storyboard your photo session or make a list of the must-have shots that you need to focus on first. So this will go back to your brand values. Wherein, do you need a product shot? Do you need a product shot wherein you're humanizing, where you want a person using the product? So for example, for Instagram, when you browse through Instagram, you can see 9 photos usually, well, depending on your phone, but 9 is the standard. So if you can map out 9 images in your head, or wherein you can produce 9 images for the layout, then that would be better. Lastly, Isa Cruz, touched about this. Create a mood or visual board, and you can find inspiration elsewhere to guide you. And I guess at the end of the day, again, go back to your branding and visual values. Next. So lighting, definitely work with what you have. Find a spot in your house. If you like this spot, and if you have no choice, but you can only shoot in this spot because everything else is being used by everyone else in the house, then, stick to that. Observe the light that happens from, sunrise to sunset. I think Zara mentioned this, wherein her brand values is sunrise. So she never shoots anything like in the dark or during sunset. That's fine too. But, if you want to make your photos a little bit more dynamic and see how you can, enhance using light for your own benefit, then, pick a spot and observe how the light falls. So here on the right, these are just a few images. So this is from the Earthsea account. So these are just a few images that I saw that they've been posting lately. So if you notice, obviously they're all different models, but I'm pretty sure this was all just shot with a smartphone, just going through their feed. And if you see, like, just looking at the photos, I can tell if some photos are taken during sunrise or sunset. Next. So this is a sample setup that I did just a few days ago, just to kind of show that, you can do anything with what you have. So this is kind of like where we live here. And then, so I found a spot that's near the window. We really have that translucent barrier because we're in the ground floor and we don't want people peeking in from outside to inside. This blanket I have is actually my dog's blanket. And then I just chose a product that looks a little bit like, I was looking through the ArteFino's clients, and I just chose a product that kind of like looks similar. And then I'll segue to the next slide. So I mentioned that because I actually took a photo of the product, and I'll show you how easy it was to just edit it in using my phone settings. So, a lot of people, they use a lot of apps. I mean, that's great, but to be honest, with the newer phones right now, even editing with the default settings is great. But again, if you want to level up, for example, your mood board gives a different vibe or mood, like, you want to stick to the 1940s or vintage, then I would suggest using apps because they have filters wherein you can buy or you can even use for free and then just kind of edit out. So for apps, I would suggest Visco or Lightroom, which is Lightroom Mobile. So in the next slide, so here you'll see I took a photo from a bird's eye view. You can see here the rule of thirds, and so here on the left, you'll see the original photo, and then I just edited it like two different kinds of edits, either warmer or cooler. And at the end of the day, it's really up to you on what your brand values are. If your brand values are a little bit more on the cooler tone, then obviously stick to the cooler edit. If it's more on the warmer tone, then stick to the warmer edit. And then the next slide, you'll see how I edited it. So on the left, I used like just the in-house default filter of my phone. And then I just adjusted the intensity. So the intensity pertains to how much of that filter will be applied to your image. In the middle, that's the cooler image. And on the right side, I didn't use any filter. I literally just increased the brightness. So you can see just from my phone that I did a while ago, I took a photo, minimal editing. And I think I don't know what you think, but I think like it's an image that you can use like in your social media if this person that I bought this from was selling it. So I've discussed a lot of foundations, which hopefully will guide you when you create your own photos. The next few slides are photos or case studies with wherein I applied all of what I just discussed. So this first case study, I guess you've seen a few of the photos already throughout the presentation. So this client of mine, I mentioned it already, she's an interior designer. The focus of this photo shoot was to photograph her patio transformation, because she transformed this from how it was before, which is completely not as pretty as this. So my advice here, what we decided, because she's an interior designer, her goals were, we needed to photograph the space as a whole, and also she wanted to highlight the furniture that she chose for her patio. So in this essence, I told her it'll be easier to create a moment or a bigger picture, and then I can go in and take photos of the details after. So even for you, like, even if you're selling like earrings or a bag, you can always, create a moment in your head. I think Isa Cruz already spoke about it, wherein, what's the lifestyle of your market? So recreate that in your home, recreate that moment and then photograph that. And on the next, so this is the same interior designer. So this is in her dining room. The objective of this was to sell the tablescape, because she had some partnerships with them. And so same idea, we shot it wide first, and then I came in and did some detail shots. So you're also probably wondering, it came out like, well, she seems like she has a lot of space. So actually, this photo, it looks nice and clean. But in reality, if you step one step behind, all the clutter was there. So if you see on the right, I cut off the kitchen. It's because all the products that we had to move, or we brought in, or we thought she wanted to bring, she wanted to use, we didn't use, and then we just put it aside. So if you're worried about not having enough space, don't worry. You just need like a certain space, and then everything else can be in the background. And then next. So I looked at the clientele of ArteFino. So here are just a few, one that's very specific, which I think, I got a few photos from the internet, which I think like, it uses the same foundations that I mentioned, same elements, which I think you can apply to your own product. I also noticed actually, well, this jewelry, it's like really tiny, but I noticed the jewelry in ArteFino, it's actually chunky. So I think it'll be easier for you to even photograph. So here you can see like at the bottom, just simple product shots. On the lower right, you can see it looks like she just put holes in the bond paper and just kind of played around with it. And then with the model, if you're wanting to use a model, maybe, have certain angles that you want her face, and maybe add another element so that she can kind of play around with. Next. Notice also with everything that I'll show, they all have a clean background. So having a clean background can really step up your game in terms of your images. So here, this is for home products. Again, simple background, and then like here on the very right, where the person is holding the bag, literally that was hard light. That's probably under 12 noon, and then just whatever wall. And next. So here is clothing. Here again, just different ideas. I think one thing that Isa Cruz mentioned, that one of the problems, not one of the issues, was like, what if like they don't have models, right? And what if like whoever is, modeling their clothes, they don't want to show their face. So here in the upper left, you can see a perfect example. A person is wearing it, the head is not seen, but they used a bit of like, they played with shadows. And then it made the photo pop up more. As I mentioned again, invest in hangers. I mean, that's obviously not a hanger, it's a branch. You can look at materials around your house, which you can use. Using your hand also works. And the lower right, you can use, use complementary things that will add to whatever you're selling. And then, as I mentioned before, if it needs to be ironed out, then iron it out, because you don't want to edit that. Like editing a wrinkle in camera or in your phone, it's just not worth it. Just fix it when you see it. Next. Similar shoes, a lot of people are selling shoes. So here are just samples, same foundations as with the others, just to give you an example. And if you notice again, clean background. And then last, next slide. So these were bags. So again, different hanger. They found a branch. They're just one clean background. They added the table. They added like a scarf or like a notebook, or a person modeling it. If she's shy, or like the person, whoever is in your household, doesn't want to show their face, then kind of photograph it in a certain angle wherein you can cover their faces, and obviously your eye is still drawn to the product itself. The last product, these are like backs of paintings. I've seen some of the social media, there's like paintings, so maybe you can use the back and play around with that. Next. So this is the last slide already, guys. So additional resources. So in terms of marketing, I would say Canva is the best tool in creating a variety of layouts. That's a whole different story, but if you haven't used it, try exploring it. I even use it. I just use the free one, not even the premium, and you can do so much more. Here's also a list of resources which you can go through on your own. I would say I read all of them, so I know like they all have useful information. They will have more information than my presentation, just because I decided to just pick and choose whichever I felt like would benefit you guys, especially thinking that you're just starting from scratch. So in closing or in summary, I hope that the foundations that I mentioned will help you produce consistent quality images that reflects your brand. If you feel stuck, again, go back to your brand or visual values, which you will have to dive in before even producing these images. So that wraps my presentation. I guess it is Mel's turn, and thanks for having me.
Wow, that was so amazing, Isa. Thank you so much. I learned so much. So thank you so much, Isa and Isa. Isa Cruz and Isa Sarmiento. That was so educational and insightful. To all of you who took the time from your busy schedules to be with us here today, thank you. And to Janice and to Zara, thank you for your sharings this afternoon. We hope that you all leave us today with new skills and insights on branding, staying authentic and true to yourself, and on photography, which is all about the use of light, composition, clean backgrounds. I love that. We at ArteFino are here to help and to assist you, and we wish you immense amounts of creation and connection. Thank you, everybody, and good afternoon to all. And for those reimagined brand partners that we have, please stay on if you can still. I know we're kind of running a little late. I didn't expect it to run this late, but I hope you found the talk insightful and helpful for all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
Who's gonna talk?
Are we gonna do a
Thanks,
photo?
everyone.
Who's
Yeah.
Are
gonna
we gonna do a photo?
have photo?
Oh, okay.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.